Oh, there you go. Hi. Welcome to the first Wardley Map sessions of the 2020 Open Security Summit. We actually have a ton of Wardley Map sessions, and it's a great one to start with Goher, which has been doing mapping for a couple of years and has really embraced the concept in a really great way. So, the next slide. The main thing here is that what we expect sort of, from you is that, so what you should expect, sorry, from this is that, it's a 10-day high energy experience. This is the pre-summit training sessions. Then we still have all the summit sessions. It's all about learn by working, by collaborating, by facilitated with other practitioners, and really trying to create solutions for real world problems. So even, for example, on the mapping exercise here, let's bring real world problems, bring real world concepts, real world things that you are experiencing. And then we can basically, walk through it, and maps is a great way to address it. So next slide. The main thing that we kind of want from you is participate, right? You should really be engaged. We all care deeply about what we do, but we ask you to have mutual respect and kind of an objective distance on on the other side. Everybody has opinions. We bound not to agree with everything, but let's challenge each other, but also be very focused on the solutions. Next one. The key thing here. Yeah, one more. Yeah. So the key thing about the summit is openness. And everything is recorded. We're going to share all this stuff, but if you don't want to be identified, don't turn on the video and use NA as your name, right? That works too. It's also very important that everything we create here is released under open source license and Creative Commons. And this is, for example, very relevant for the mapping, because one of the things we're going to try to also do is create and expand the existing body of material on maps. So everything that we create here, we should be aiming at publishing and releasing and sharing it, because that will really, help in this case, again, move the mapping to the next level. Next one. Finally, it's super important that we have a lot of respect for each other, right? We're here to collaborate. If you spot any problems, any kind of things, please raise that with us straight away. It's all about creating an environment where everybody's welcome, really diverse community. We really want everybody to feel welcome and respected here. And we all expect everybody to really, preserve a certain degree of professionalism around here. So finally, please, share your views. There's the hashtag OSS 2020. There's the invite to the Slack if you need, and basically learn, right? You're here to learn. This is learning sort of on steroids throughout this week. And remember that we can still add new sessions. So sometimes the best sessions in the summit are added and created during the summit. So, if we find the specific topics that we want, specific things that we want to do, in fact, this year is easier to scale because we can create all sorts of Zoom sessions, and we can basically, if one individual and 10 others wants to talk about a particular topic, we basically can facilitate and create the sessions and expose to the community and then drive it. So if you have ideas on other sessions to do, even, now do the training and on the summit, let's talk about it. Let's make it happen. Send a pull request, right? And we add it to the schedule. And over to you. Go ahead.
Brilliant. Okay. Thanks for that, Dennis. Great. Well, we've got a good crowd together, which is really good to know. And yeah, just a quick introduction to myself. So I head up InfoSec at L&Q, and I've got a background. So I actually used to work with Dennis at Photobox. Worked in fintech, worked in media, worked in finance. So quite a varied background. L&Q, for those of you that don't know, is a housing association. So it sounds really dull and boring, but actually we've got a great technology team, and we're doing some really cool stuff as well. So yeah, just a real quick introduction. I don't want to spend too much time on myself because you're going to have to listen to me for the next 2 hours, or hopefully not. Cool. Really, the discussion should be open and honest. I think we've got Chatham House rules, but this is going to be kind of, well, it's not Chatham House rules because it is open, so this will be shared. So please do share what you're willing to. Anything you don't want to, please don't. I want it to be an interactive session, so it's not going to be me just talking and you guys listening. Absolutely want feedback from all of you. So please do speak. Just do allow other people to speak as well when they're talking, just to create and keep some level of non-chaos. There's no right or wrong with this. So there are these concepts are going to be open to scrutiny. I think Simon Wardley will himself very open to that. You know, this isn't perfect. So don't be shy to ask questions, to speak, to ask what you may consider a silly question, because chances are, and this is what I was like when I first started looking at Wardley maps, it was, what the hell is this, or that doesn't make sense. Ask questions. That's the point. It's interactive. And I was going to say, if you have any burning questions while I'm talking, please put them in the chat, and I will stop at the right time and refer to you. So please do reach out via the chat ideally, but you know, if you want to unmute yourself, please do so. If you need to do something else while in the session, please go on mute, just to allow so that there's no background noise. So that would be great. Excellent. Fantastic. Right. So what is Wardley mapping? So how many of you have never heard of Wardley mapping or know what it is? Okay. Okay, so most of you have come across Wardley mapping. How many of you have created your own Wardley map? And I don't mean a cup of tea.
So you can use the reactions, right? So you can go reactions and then put, like I just did there, little thumbs up.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you guys, so we've got one, so we've got Paul, Dario's done it. Anyone else? Dennis, obviously, Rob. Cool. All right, there's a few of us. Excellent. Okay, well, that's good. It helps me get an understanding. But what I'll do, as I said, please do shout. I'm gonna roll through this fairly, you know, give an introduction, a refresher for anyone who hasn't picked this up in a while, and hopefully it'll make sense. If you've got any questions, please do say. Cool. So Wardley mapping is essentially the brainchild of Simon Wardley. He, you know, was the former CEO, and he's worked at, you know, being an advisor for a number of startups. All of this is available online, and I'll put a link here. There's a whole plethora of information. His book is online. It's really interesting, very comprehensive, and I'm going to be leaning on a lot of that information because I don't want to bastardize anything that he has put out there, and I think he explains it well, and I can talk over it and dive into some of the elements. I'm by no means as good as Simon Wardley, so you'll have to forgive me if I don't say anything, if I say something that isn't exactly to what he would say. But there's some really good information on this link. Please pick it up and have a look at it. So to begin with, so normally when something is mapped, if we look at a system mapping, so this is based off of where Simon used to work, taken directly from his site. So this is essentially when someone says we need to map our systems or our solution, this is what normally it looks like. So you have your kind of your power, data center, compute, print, CRM, website, platform, and so forth. So you can do that with different systems, different ways of doing that, and that's what normally is seen as mapping. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. Has anything changed between these two slides? And I'm going back and forth and making it quite obvious.
No.
Right. So that's exactly the right answer. So for those who don't know Wardley maps, when they look at this, they say, okay, it's moved directions, but actually nothing's actually changed. So the CRM system is just still connected to the website and compute, but it's now sitting to the right of print, whereas before it was sitting to the left of print. Basically, it is a diagram and it's not mapping. So when people map out these processes, it's not a map, it's just a diagram. It's a data flow diagram. So I'm going to ask the same question again for this example here. Is this a map? So Luke's shaking his
No.
head.
No.
By way of hands, who thinks this is a map? So just give us a reaction. So Rob says it's a map. Paul, who else? Dennis, Dario. Okay. So interestingly, right, a number of you don't. So Wallaby said it's a map as well. There's a few of you that are saying that or haven't said it's not a map. It's not a trick question. It's not to catch anyone out. So that first one was actually a map. And the reason it's a map is that map was based on a reality. It wasn't, the proportions weren't exact, but the general trajectory was the same. So if you look at the data flow here, the flow, so if you wanted to get from Exeter to Nottingham, you'd go up the M5 to Bristol, then you'd take the M4 to London, and London you take the M1 up to Nottingham. If we move Nottingham down here, similar to what we did before, the context changed completely and you would end up in the wrong direction. If someone said to you, go northwest to Nottingham from London, that's not correct. So all of a sudden, the whole meaning of the map has changed. And that's a really important concept in Wardley mapping. When you map something out, if you move something, what that moving means something to the map as opposed to it not meaning anything. And that's a really fundamental principle, because if you gave someone these directions, they'd either get lost or they'd say you got the wrong directions, right? And all of a sudden your whole approach changes. So it's a really important piece to just get your head around. Any questions so far? Anyone want to disagree with me that's not a map? Which is fine, by the way. Cool, excellent. Right, so all of a sudden that map is meaningful. All of a sudden there's a meaning behind what we're trying to achieve. So this is taken from Sam Wardley, and these are the 5 principles that he works to, 5 factors. And that's to give us visibility. This is to help with strategy, visibility, and direction. You know, and that's what true mapping does. It helps us understand the landscape, the climate. It's based on orienting with doctrine. There's a purpose. So whenever we map something, what is the purpose? What are we trying to do? And then we can make good decisions based on that mapping. And that's what's really, really critical. So there's more in-depth knowledge about this. And again, I didn't want to go into depth about this because this is an intro. And, you know, I want to save the good stuff for other sessions. But I'm more than happy to discuss this if we so have time in this session. So this is essentially a Wardley map. How many of you have seen this before? So Dario's seen it, Wallaby, Paul. Okay, about 50% of the people here have seen it. Okay, cool. So what this is essentially, this is where we take a diagram or a process map and we plot it against something that gives us meaning and context. So let me just look. What we've got here is we've got the y-axis and the x-axis. So the x-axis is basically your evolution. So it goes from genesis, custom built, product, and commodity. How many of you understand what that means? Okay, not seeing any hands going up, so I'll explain. So essentially what we've got is this x-axis tells us the maturity of a product or a solution or a something that we need to look at. So genesis is a simple example of genesis would be someone has a VM on their laptop that they use to do some work. That would sit in the bottom right, bottom left-hand side here in Genesis. So Genesis being it's newly formed, it's an idea, it's someone's pulled something together. The y-axis is where it's invisible or visible. So in that example that I've given, if everyone was using that VM, on that one person's laptop, it would be higher up the value chain, because all of a sudden it's something people use, it's tangible, it's widely known, people are aware of it. So that's what that means. Then you have custom built. So custom built would become almost the maturity of that solution. So if you've got a VM on a laptop, custom built would be a VM sitting in your on-prem data center, as an example. So again, then if you were plotting that on this map, that node would sit here in custom built. The next iteration of that is a product. So a product would essentially look like a VM that would be sitting on a co-location or on cloud storage. So it's more mature, it's a better product. If only a few people use it or one person uses it, it sits at invisible. If many people use it, it goes higher up the value chain. And then you have commodity. Commodity is essentially would be SaaS. So it would be a ready-made SaaS product which you use your VM for, which is already commoditized and you just buy off the shelf. You can go somewhere and buy a service for that, and you would plot that here. Now, what the purpose of that is, it gives us context of that specific node or that dependency compared to other things. So I'll elaborate on that as we go further. But does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions? Got Robert raising his hand.
So the only question I would have is, depending on your operating model, commodity assumes that cloud is better?
It does, that's the example for sure, but commodity is essentially something that is mature. It's in its best version of itself, where it's, you know, resilient and so forth. Whereas Genesis is something that, you know, it's an idea. It's someone cobbling something together in a sandbox would be Genesis. So that's the kind of differentiator, but you can, there is a bit of context around that.
So
but on that one, right? It also depends on what the anchor is and what question you ask.
Right.
So there's cases where I can argue that a cloud solution is on Genesis, right? So it's all about the question you're asking. But if you're looking at, for example, from compute, clearly is easy to do, you know, a cloud deployment or to spin up a machine in a cloud that is locally. But depending on what you want to do, it might be on either side, right?
Yeah. So it's you've got to apply the business and operational context to which will be your variables to define whether it's custom built product or commodity.
Yeah, so you have your anchor, you have your kind of point on what you're gravitating towards, and that will sort of, as we'll go through this, it will make a bit more sense. So it's just really to give an example of kind of the scale for the x-axis.
Thank you.
And the y.
Yeah.
Are these?
Yeah, go ahead.
Are these kind of the x and y axis each time, or is this just this specific example?
So this is generally what Simon Wardley recommends we use. That should be used, but there are. I'm just going to move on to the next slide, which is the perfect question you've asked. So you've got the definitions. This is like a cheat sheet, and where you've got Genesis, custom products, and commodity, you can see the different characteristics. So you could almost, if you wanted to, because of these characteristics, you could potentially change those to reflect those. And I've done that as well for some of the examples I've got, but these are essentially what these would mean. So something that's uncertain, you know, if you do knowledge management, something's uncertain, something learning on use, something learning on operation, and something that's known and accepted.
So each of these could be an x-axis, right?
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes there's maps that make sense to do that. It's interesting that, you know, the kind of the Genesis custom build product and commodity does seem to fit most maps, but there's a ton of maps that, you know, I've even gone from bad to worse, you know, bad to good, right? Or knowledge, right? You might go not understood to expert, right? Yeah. So, you know, this is just, you know, the key is the legend, right? And that's what the map, right? The key is that as long as we can all agree what does the X and the Y mean, then movement makes sense.
Absolutely, and that's the point. And this is a really good way. So this is a really useful cheat sheet. So this will all be made available to you, but you can use those kind of legends across, as Dennis mentioned, and and then replace Genesis custom built product commodity with those ones respectively.
And so should that lead you to start breaking down what's on the Wardley map? So, example, we were talking about the cloud applications. Well, a lot of that cloud technology is kind of ubiquitous commodity end, but what you put into it, the thing you build inside it, may be complete Genesis.
Absolutely, and that's
separate. Yeah.
And I think this is the bit that Dennis was mentioning before we started this. What happened was, what you can do is each node, so each point that you map on the map, you could actually zoom into and then break that apart. And then you could zoom in further to that, because a VM by itself is one node, but then when you go into that VM, there's a number of dependencies within that VM that have to do certain things. You map that out, and then you can then break it apart, because the idea is that we get visibility on whatever we're looking at, and it helps us understand where we need to focus our efforts, or what's weaker, what's stronger, where we should drive. It gives us a bigger picture, and this is where it becomes really powerful in security, because all of a sudden, from security, we rely a lot on visibility in what security does. Without that visibility, we don't always know which direction to go in, and that's where the plotting becomes super powerful. Right. Okay, so this is something I thought would be useful, just to give some context. So where we had that initial diagram, all of a sudden that becomes meaningful when you overlay it on a Wardley map. So I see Simon's joined, which is great. I'm really feeling under pressure now. But hi Simon, thank you. Good of you to join. So yeah, so what we've got here is, when we overlay that initial diagram over the Wardley map, what we've got all of a sudden is, when it changes from there to there, all of a sudden that CRM system goes from being custom built, maybe local on a on-prem server or something that's been bespoked, to something that someone's purchased as a product and put in a co-location data center or something to that effect. So that's where, when we map using Wardley maps, it helps us understand and get a much bigger picture of where we are and where we should be. So, the customer is so ignore the customer, because that would be the anchor, but all of these components, all of a sudden, it starts telling us something useful. Does that make sense? Cool, excellent. I'm glad I'm making sense, which is great. Dario, right, got thumbs up. Fantastic. Thumbs up's working excellently. Love it. Cool. So yeah, essentially the meaning of the map completely changes and becomes useful. So how can this be applied? Okay, the tea shop. So how many of you have done the cup of tea example? It's something that's very common whenever you go to Wardley Maps. Okay, Dario's done it. Simon's definitely done it, I know. Robert has. Fantastic. Okay, so this is a tea shop, and the tea shop makes cups of tea. And when you normally map out kind of the dependencies on making a cup of tea, obviously it goes to business and public. So they're the two focal points. You've got a cup of tea. What do you need? You need a cup, of course. So we've got a cup here. Let me highlight that. Let me see if I can. There you go. Right. Got a cup of tea here. We've got. You need a cup to make a cup of tea. Otherwise, it's just water. You need tea or tea bags. You need your hot water. You've got. You need water to make the hot water. You can't have water. Hot water doesn't appear. So you've got your dependency there. You've got a kettle, which you need to make the hot water, and you need power to power the kettle. So they're your dependencies. Very simple, very simple layout. So at the moment, that hasn't been mapped. It's just dependencies. So normally, that's what you normally get. What we have here is, when we map it properly, we can then start seeing meaningful information. So this was, I'm not going to ask everyone to map out a cup of tea because we were always asked to do this. I've got a slightly different variation, and that's going to be the exercise. So we're coming to that. But essentially what we have is when you start mapping it, power is a commodity. We got, you know, outlets. We're not using generators. If you're using a generator, you might be able to move it to custom built, or maybe Genesis to power. If you've got a tea shop and you're running that through, you know, a generator. But essentially, we're assuming the assumption or the knowledge here is that the power is coming from an outlet somewhere. We've got a kettle which is custom built. Now that's interesting. Now kettles would normally be a product or a commodity, depending on what type of kettle you're using. And this is where the context can change. But a kettle, so we're looking at kettle, it's custom built. Then we've got the hot water, which is, you know, a commodity. We've got water, tea, cups, all of these things are made. We can go and buy them in a shop. They're easy to come by. We're not having to manufacture cups. We're not manufacturing tea. If on the other hand, you were manufacturing tea, you would probably be looking towards Genesis or custom built for that dependency. What then starts happening is we start looking at this and start saying, okay, what does this mean for me as a business making cups of tea? What does it mean for the business? What does it mean for the public? Do we start looking at the kettle? Because the kettle is in custom built, so it's maybe one kettle. As an organization or a company, do we need a industrial kettle? Do we need a big cool water container that has I don't know, that can boil 2 gallons of water at a time? It gives us a context of what's stronger, what's weaker, what does our landscape look like, and what do we want to improve in terms of efficiency. And then we start tapping into strategic direction, because that helps us understand what should we be focusing our efforts on. You know, do we want to change the way we get hot water? No, we've got hot water that delivers a cup of tea. So we don't need to worry about the hot water bit. We don't need to use hot liquid nitrogen or something, I don't know, whatever, right? We don't need to change that bit. But actually the kettle is the bit we've identified that isn't as strong as we probably would like. Is there anything we can do? So what you then have is a direction of travel where you've got the kettle here. Number one, standardizing power allows kettles to evolve faster. So over a period of time, the kettle might have been put on fire. Now it's you've got standard power, means that, you know, you can use any outlet to power your kettle. And that's a very simple example. And then you've got number 2, hot water is obvious and well known. So, you know, that's why it's in commodity. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions around that? It's good. Reassuring to know that I'm making sense still. Excellent.
So there are dependencies there then. That's showing dependencies as well.
Yeah, so the links are dependencies. So where you've got water, to make hot water, you need water. So that's why there's a dependency. Same way.
There's no arrow, there's no direction on that. Is that not necessary then?
So I personally like to use arrows because that helps me understand the map a bit better on the dependencies. In this example, there isn't, because it's quite simple, but you can, I think, you know, I'm sure someone will correct me, but I don't think it's...
Well, the direction is top down, right? So when you look at this, right, the anchors are at the top. So, and that's where you also get that visibility layer, right? So if you look at it, you basically have, you know, the business needs a cup of tea. So he sees that to make a cup of tea, you need a cup of tea and water. So that's the next layer down. Right. And then to do hot water, you need a kettle, and then you move, and then you need power. The interesting example here of the kettle is that when you look at this, you see that in this company, they're spending a lot of money to buy a kettle, because to buy a kettle that is custom built is going to be a lot more expensive than to buy a kettle that you can buy off the shelf. You can go and buy a product of somewhere. What is interesting about this is it depends what shop it is. I was actually talking to somebody about this example a while back, and we were saying that I used to go to this tea specialist place, right? You know, because I like the environment, and I was working there, and they actually had a really complicated kettle, right, to boil the water. And I found it was interesting that if they had a typical 10 quid, kettle that will make a cup of tea, I might actually, as a consumer, think, it doesn't feel very special. So they had a completely custom built kettle for them, which was part of their brand. But it means that it was very expensive for them. But it's maybe what they want to do. So the movement that you see here, that one is the movement of where we want to invest, where we want to basically say, let's see if we can productize the kettle. So if you were a Starbucks, for example, the first versions of your machines might be custom built, right? But eventually you want to make hundreds of thousands of them, so you want to make into a product.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
so, I mean, you said about top down, and then you said a business needs a cup of tea, and a cup of tea needs a cup, and it needs tea, needs hot water. So that's one good way of looking at that, getting it's like a dependency tree almost.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And the moment where the maps really clicked for me was when I realized that, for example, when you do a dependency tree or you do a thread model, you actually have a graph, right? You have this goes to this, goes to this, goes to that one. But movement doesn't matter. And that's a big problem, because from a metadata point of view, you're losing a lot, right? You're losing a lot of context. So by even breaking a simple data flow diagram, right? A simple sequence diagram into this sort of grid where you go top down, sequence, and then left to right, which is the evolution, it makes a lot of sense. And by the way, the whole visible invisible, we had a big thread about it the last summit, and when we did ask Simon about it, he did say, basically it was half of it made up, right? People just needed something to hold on the left, right? Yeah. But the main thing is actually the evolution, that you then know that things will evolve in a certain sequence. So they go from one state to the other. It doesn't always mean that going right to left to right is good, right? Sometimes things go backwards, right? Sometimes because of events, you go from what becomes a commodity is now a product, is now a custom build. Like if you look at Kodak films, for example, Polaroid films, there was a time where it was almost a commodity, right? You buy it everywhere, right? Super product. Now you can barely buy one, right? So
absolutely, and it moves around. I think that's what's great about it. You're absolutely right, Dennis. It's very fluid. It does change. It's not fixed. There's no specific kind of rule of thumb. It's very, very fluid. Cool.
So Goher, why in this diagram, if you just go back, why isn't water a dependency of the kettle?
Honestly, this is not my one, so it's hard to say. I didn't create this. This is an example. I mean,
because you use the kettle and the water together.
Yeah, so to get hot water, you need kettle and water. But I think that's where that's coming from. And then you need power to power the kettle, so you can make the hot water. And that's
the hot water depends on the kettle. That's what it's showing.
But the hot water depends on having a kettle. And
yes, water.
Kettle plus water.
So that's as shown.
That again?
But I'll read that, seeing that the hot water, and looking to the left, I see kettle. So I say hot water depends on the kettle. You can't have the hot water without the kettle.
And also without water.
And you can't have the hot water if you haven't got the water as well.
Yeah.
So the hot water basically needs the kettle and water.
Correct.
That's how I read it.
The same way that a cup of tea needs a cup, needs a tea, and needs hot water.
Yeah. But the way I was looking at this was, if you look at the kettle depends on water and power in order to create hot water.
It's a chain of needs. So this needs this, needs this, needs this. So example, hot water needs a kettle, it needs cold water. I mean, you can't get hot water if you haven't got those two items. And a kettle, it just needs power. It doesn't actually need water in it. You can take a kettle and you can just switch it on. Okay, it might burst into flames or whatever, but a kettle just needs power.
I'm being too practical. Sorry, Simon.
No, it's perfectly good. One of the things to remember is all maps, like geographical maps, are imperfect representations of a space.
Exactly.
What they enable you to do is see the assumptions and challenge the assumptions of others. So one of the problems we have in business is we tend to run with stories. And if you've got stories and you challenge the story, you're challenging the person telling the story, the storyteller, and so which is why it becomes political. By getting the assumptions on maps, you can challenge them without challenging the person. So I can say, why have you got the kettle in custom built? Surely the map is wrong, and I'm not challenging the person, and that's the point.
Yeah, it's there. It's a fact, or it's an item that can be queried, and it can certainly move. So this is not fixed, and this will change from you know, from business to business or from tea shop to tea shop. That's the point. Cool. All right. I saw some questions. I'm trying to pick up the questions. I'm having struggling. So we let me have a quick look.
To get used to this Slack, but not Slack, Zoom.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to get used to it. So Luke.
I was trying to answer Tom's question, but
Oh, right. Okay.
it probably needs a real answer.
Yeah. No,
Can
that's
I
fine.
read the questions?
No, that's correct. Right spanner at the top. It's been asked. Anchor is at the top. Anchor being determined under the reviewing map. When you read the map top down, is exactly, yeah. So I think the answer is correct. Look.
Yeah. Cool. Perfect. All right. Great. Thank you. Right. So next bit. So I think this is quite useful. So I will do my very best to explain what this means. But essentially, this is kind of the evolution. So put these together. So when you have Genesis, it goes to custom built. From there, it becomes product. It becomes essentially a service, which is like a commodity. So the idea is that you know, like security is always moving to, you know, move security to the left. This is almost, you want to move towards the right and up. That's the general evolution of any specific product or solution or tool. To give some extra context, a lot of these, so Simon really nicely, and again, I want to make sure I get this across right. Simon really nicely talks about pioneers, settlers, and town planners in an organization. And he was talking about the pioneers are do some great stuff, and the settlers do and the town planners do. And what happens is the pioneers want to do great, new, exciting new things. So they work a lot in the Genesis and custom built domain. That's what excites them, that's what interests them. But when they start moving, when the product or whatever the solution is they're working on moves into that product field, they're less interested because they want to create the next exciting thing. So what you then have is the settlers who pick it up, evolve it, make it better, improve it, and take it to that that position of commodity. And then from the commodity, the town planners essentially go to town and they do their great stuff, which is they repeat, replicate, and turn it into something that is they can branch out and scale as needed. And it helps with the context. So this is, we're moving towards the exercise now. So this is just to help everyone get a bit of context around how to kind of start populating a Wardley map. So here's a kind of a demographic of what pioneers, settlers, and town planners do. So the pioneers, and this term's interesting, the pioneers, the settlers steal from the pioneers, so they get their idea and they say, right, we're going to make it better. And then town planners then steal it from the settlers, and then they really make it something that's really, really tight. So I'm not going to go through each of these.
The stealing, I have to say, the stealing part, it took me a little while to get my head around it until I actually experienced it, right? and is actually so true, right? Because what happens is that if you look at it, the pioneer crowd is the one that creates something, right? They keep tinkering, they keep evolving, and they go in multiple directions, but eventually they create something that works, right? But I think it's always very tempting to keep wanting to improve it, to keep holding on to it. But the reality is that what you now create is a space for the more typical settler who basically can take it on, document it, explain it, actually run it on his machine, right? You know, actually really start to introduce a much more bigger discipline into it, which is a complete different set of skills. But they almost, I think the key part that I realized was that you need to have a sense of ownership. That is very hard when you feel that somebody's still in charge of it. So the way this works is that you kind of have to kick out the pioneers out and say, look, you guys go and do the next one. You go and figure out the next challenge. You go into the next project, and then leave them for the settlers to take it. And then the same thing would eventually happen as the settlers mature it. They keep thinking with the product, but sometimes what you need to do is actually let go and let the town planners steal it, because they're now going to take it to the next level, right? Absolutely. And it's very interesting that you know, when you look at this dynamic at play, the reality is the pioneers will drive the settlers crazy, the same way that the settlers will drive the pioneers crazy, and especially with a town planner, with the pioneers, it's a massive,
Yeah.
problem, right? But in most organizations, you mix all of this, which is why then things don't tend to work, right? Or things clash a lot, because you do need to split this into multiple groups, right? So Goher, you're gonna like this. So what we've done at Glasswall is we have 3 product sequences. We call it MVPs, VPs, and Ps. So every product starts as a minimal viable prototype, which is a pioneer. Then it becomes a VP, which is a viable product, right? And then it becomes a P, which is a product.
Yeah.
So the MVP is the typical proof of concept developed, just like, can we cross the line? Can we get to the other side? Can we make the plane fly? Where the Ps, the town planners, are our SRE teams. These are the guys running in production. They're running 24/7 systems. They have very little tolerance for any kind of deviation, because it's all about stability, performance, resilience, working super effectively. And in a way, the VPs, the settlers, are actually the ones that go and try to figure out and discover the product. They're the ones who actually take the MVPs that we create and go to market and going, hey, do customers actually really want this, right? We believe they want to, but can we get them to even use it? So it's we try to adapt this and use it like that.
Yeah, and it's a great example. I mean, I think I love the example at the bottom, which is most likely to build Pioneer is most likely to build a partially functioning 3D printer, right, with Lego. So they're going to use 3D printers, they're going to bespoke it, they're going to go crazy with it, come out with all these different things. Settlers are going to just then take that and turn it into something that people are going to buy, productize it, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden the town planners see that and say, actually, we've got a real opportunity here. We want to make a factory, and we want to churn this out by the bucket load. And then that's where the town planners work. And it's just a really good way of just getting your head around kind of the whole context of the map. Cool. Any questions?
Not sure if it's a quick. I've got a question half baked. It's not fully baked in my head, but I'll just to talk about my idea, and maybe you can come up with an answer.
MVP or is it a VP?
It's an MVP question. So the idea is, right, settlers are taken from pioneers, town planners from settlers, and then that whole pioneers users component from. Is that because once something is kind of commoditized in utility and inspection, I'm talking like a product or a solution or an offering, that then opens up the use cases for certain components of that offering to be broken down and start again in the genesis phase. So it's the pioneers that when they're looking for work to do, they look at something that's quite mature, and what are the use cases around it, and how we can take a component within that offering that's not mature and then start the cycle again. I'm just trying to think where does that, what component is that the pioneers take from town planners?
Yeah, I think a really good example, and I've been watching, I don't know if you guys see VFX React. So there's these virtual effects guys that react to CGI in movies. Anyway, it got me thinking, and what happens is, if you look at the evolution of 3D graphic software that CGI used, so what you had was someone had an art tool, they used Photoshop, and they created these kind of works. What's happened, that's evolved to a point where that solution is now, you can do all this great stuff, but there's gaps in that. So, like when they animate hair on a model, right? That was something that was weird. So someone who's a pioneer then said, right, how do we turn that into an algorithm and make it so it's more realistic? So they start then working on modeling that pulls that together, which is a component. Then that matures, and then that becomes part of that product. So what you've got is, because you've got this mature product now, it means that you don't have to mature that product, but there might be something missing from that needs to be supplemented, or something additional, or something that complements that. So it opens up new ideas because you've got a new capability. Yeah. So you've got that movement. So it goes back to the beginning again. Does that?
Right. So those ideas for new pioneer work comes from stuff which is sitting with the town planners.
Exactly. So you've got
be added to.
If you've gone to, if you look at cloud, you go from where we are to where, when you have servers that were on-prem to cloud. Does that solve all the problems? It solves the problem of infrastructure, but you still got other challenges, which then opens up. So you've got security tools and X, Y, and Z. So you've got that constant new innovation that's driven from new commodities, and then you've got that cycle.
Can I just clarify just one point there? Most things in society, what happens is as they evolve to more commodity, more utility components, they enable higher order systems to be built. So, for example, as bricks become more of a standard commodity, it'll enable all different forms of buildings and structures on top, going all the way back to De Architectura, which is Roman times, as mechanical components became more standard. So we went from individually made nuts and bolts, one nut fitting one bolt, through to the creation of Maudslay's screw cutting lathe through Whitworth standards to standard nuts and bolts. You get an explosion of higher order systems such as machinery. So what happens is as these components tend to evolve, they tend to be grouped together, many different components to create entire new capabilities and meeting new needs. And so if you think about computing, how we've shifted from custom built up product servers to utility, that's caused an explosion of new things like Netflix and all these other new capabilities which are built on these underlying components. Sorry, thank you.
No, thanks, Simon. That's perfect. I was going to disagree with you, but there's actually in that. So no, spoken from the man himself. Thank you for that, Simon. Really good.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Goher. One more very quick one. If I know, everything's context specific and there's no, best practice, one size fits all, but from your experience, Goher, when settlers are stealing from town planners, is it from pioneers, is it, you pioneers go off, let us take full ownership of this now, or is there a transition period where you've got pioneers and settlers working together to kind of transition it over from one to the other?
So I think the way it should work is that the pioneer settlers, town planners work together. So you can, you can go into a squad or whatever it is. So the idea is it moves through the cycle where there's less stealing and more evolution. And I think that's where we want to be. If someone is stealing, then if it's in the same organization, then you've probably got some fundamental challenges in your organization. But, if it was a settler stealing from a pioneer from a different company, then that's a different conversation. But the point is, in an organization, you want to be in a place where they're all working together so that that product moves smoothly from kind of that genesis to it being a commodity.
So Simon, I was just trying to Google, but I think you probably have it at hand. You have a great slide on this.
You mean pioneer settler town planner?
No, that evolution of, when you start with only the pioneers and then some settlers come in and almost infect and take over, and then they kicked out, and then.
So the NHS has a concept video which demonstrates this. It's a wonderful example of, I haven't got the URL. If you just look up NHS, National Health Service concept video, pioneers, settlers, you'll probably find it on Google. The point is the act is stealing, as in ultimately the settlers steal from the pioneers, the town planners steal from the settlers. But it's not a stealing as in we charge in with axes and just throw everybody out and we grabbed it and blah. It is basically an invasion of one team to another team and pushing that other team forward.
I've got actually the video here. I'll happily play it if everyone can see it. Can everyone see that on the screen?
No.
Nope, not at the moment.
We can't see it, but play it. No, well, play it on. I think you need to share your screen, share the video, but I think it's worth playing that video because it's amazing.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find. God, what's happening with my Zoom? There you go. Stop share. Let's restart sharing screen. Let's try this again.
Has proposed that to make good projects.
Oops, is that one?
Yeah, one sec. Yep, that's the one. Let me screen 2. There you go. Let me know if you can see that now. Can you see it?
Not yet.
No.
Now?
Nope.
No, just yourself. When you share
screen. There you go. I've got it. Sorry.
Cool.
Yep.
All it takes is for Simon to start talking and the machine starts working.
Simon Wardley has proposed that to make good projects you need 3 types of people. Pioneers, settlers and town planners are all brilliant people and all have very valuable input from Genesis to industrialisation. Simon says that
pioneers are brilliant people. They are able to explore never-before-discovered concepts, the uncharted land. They show you wonder, but they fail a lot. Settlers are brilliant people. They can turn half-baked things into something useful for a larger audience. They build trust, they build understanding. Town planners are brilliant people. They're able to take something and industrialise it, taking advantage of scale. This requires immense skill. You trust what they build.
this film explores how we might apply his thinking to build upon agile website development practices and keep everyone happy. Let's start with a new delivery team. Then we'll put some pioneers in there. Hi pioneers! They will look at the problem and come up with a new and radical solution. Look, a sector has seen what the pioneers are up to and they have some ideas to make improvements. The settlers start to join the team. Now that the pioneers have come up with the basic ideas, they're bored. They want to get on to the next big thing. More settlers move in and start to develop the pioneers' work. But now the town planners are interested, and as they start to move in, the settlers become bored as well, so they start to move on to other things. When the other town planners move in, they start to go to town, literally. They make the work repeatable, scalable. And develop the infrastructure needed to make it industrialised. If you're wondering where the pioneers and settlers have gone, don't worry, they are working on more brilliant things in other teams. Or maybe on other things in the same team. An NHS digital concept video. Voice talent, Mia Halton.
All right, I think that was really simple and easy to explain. I probably should have started with that. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, brilliant. I love that video.
Yeah, it's a great little video. It's just it's a really nice way of you know, just illustrating. You don't have to be too clever when you're trying to explain stuff. Sometimes it's just simple ways to make it
Luke,
easy.
did that answer your question?
Yes, I think Luke, I've got
Yeah.
thumbs up, Luke.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I was thinking further around that the conflicts, obviously, because personality traits are different, right, between those different types of people. And I think having them together for a longer period of time might lead to kind of conflict and stuff like that. But that's going through a whole nother train. Yes, answered my question. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, excellent. Okay, so we're going to go to our kind of first exercise. So, right, we don't want to spend too much time on this, but it will still be useful. So we'll have 10 minutes. If we go to this link, let me try and just send it to that. I've got some chats here actually. Don't want to sound on you. Sorry. Apologies. Right. Okay. Cool. If I just type it into the chat, what I'd like to do, and if you go onto this, you've got an online Wardley map. Maps.com. There you go. Right, you've got the link. Now, if we go to that. Basically, let's try and map.
You know, can you show the browser? We're just seeing your presentation.
Yeah.
And can you also just quickly walk through
a
couple of the functionality? Because I think there's a couple of really cool features in here that, you know, if you never used it, you might miss a trick or two.
Yep. So you can use an example map, which is probably a good starting point. So let's map out a milkshake. But what we've got some components here. So you've got business, anchor, you've got public anchor. You can just literally type it. You can leave that there for the moment. But if we start off with milkshake, we can just amend these fields, copy and paste as needed. And then we can move it around. And then to create the link, you just need to change the component here to reflect that. That makes sense. So we'll need to just make those changes. But if we can all have a go, once you've got that there, you can then move it around to where you feel. So what would be quite useful is everyone to give this a quick go, see how they get on. You can start off with a new map if you're comfortable, but I think this is a good starting point. And yeah, we'll take 10 minutes. We'll get back at 3:10. I'll be here if anyone needs any help. Let's create something. Let's all go away, create it, and share it.
You can save it at the top and then share the link. So if you click on save, then if you share the link on the channel, then we can all open it up and take a look at it.
Yep. So you'll get your own link here. So if you share it, and that'll be great. It'll be really good exercise to see what people come up with. So if you share it, I'll try and keep it anonymous if you're shy. But the idea is we can all query it and just understand why we think that's the case. Mm-hmm. So same as a cup of tea, we're going to make a milkshake. So there's slightly different components. You know, we'll leave it to your discretion where you feel they sit, and we can take it from there. How does that sound?
Yeah, and just scroll down because I missed that the first time. So, you know, there's actually instructions at the bottom.
Yeah, I didn't see that. Thanks, Dennis. Cool. Does that make sense? Show of hands. Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah, all good.
Excellent. Great. Seeing thumbs going up. Cool. So, yeah, 10 minutes. I'll stay here. If anyone's got any questions while you're doing it, please do. We'll take it from there. I might give it a go myself because I haven't tried it. I've created this exercise and not done it myself. So let's see how we get on. Awesome.
Actually, can you bring the previous slides? So, which was the...
Yeah, that might be useful. You're absolutely right. There you go. No, not that one. That one.
Yeah.
Which one would be useful?
No, that's just the milkshake, so we can keep remembering where it was. That one.
There you go. Perfect. Cool.
Strawberry milkshake. Cool.
Right. Me, Dennis, and Simon will be here if you got any questions. Great. Good luck.
First of all, my apologies for joining. I hope I didn't throw your stride. It's just really interesting to listen to other people introduce mapping.
No, that's fine, Simon. I appreciate the support. As I said, I just felt a bit under pressure because, you know, I don't want to, I want to make sure I do it justice.
You're doing great, and thank you. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you under pressure at all. That was not my intention.
No. Absolutely fine. Thanks, Simon.
Pleasure.
I think I might be making an entirely different sort of adjustment to Wardley Maps for what I'm looking at it for. It's kind of interesting.
That's fine. As I said, this is the point is it will create dialogue and discussion because, as I said, everyone will approach it in a different way, but doesn't mean it's right or wrong.
Goher, are you going to show a bit later the ones you created? Remember on GDPR and PCI?
Yes, I am going to absolutely bring those. I wanted to save that as, because I didn't want to go into that because it is quite dynamic, shall we say.
Where's the link for the actual one that was populated? Because the online wardleymaps.com is just an empty map.
So if you click on example map, it will populate it for you.
Example map.
So you've got example map.
Oh, yes, got it.
Got it?
Oh, right.
Perfect.
I got it. Yeah, okay. Now I've got to try and remember how to make a milkshake.
As I said, there's loads of ways you can do this, but
I actually had the same question. Can you just list the ingredients?
Yes, I was going to say without that.
So I was hoping you guys would be creative, but you can go with milk and powdered milkshake, water. You could go with fresh strawberries,
Or just Nesquik.
or Nesquik. Yeah, exactly. You can go Nesquik. You can go strawberries, blender. You can go. I was just intrigued to see where we go with it. But,
all right.
One of the beauties, of course, is that somebody maps it out. You can see their assumptions. And so you can see if they're missing components, like, for example, you've got strawberries or something along those lines. And in business, I find this incredibly common, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, as I said, really, really interesting. So I left it vague because I didn't want to drive it too much. It's more, let's see how we get on.
So just a side story while everybody else is working. An example of this, I was actually many years ago working with one particular government agency, and we're mapping out the legal system, including the prison systems, etc. And when we were looking at the prisons, they'd start off mapping all the different users involved. For example, the police and the lawyers, the judiciary and all this sort of stuff, and governments and the public and their needs and how they all link together. And so they created this wonderful map. And it's quite good because I was able to look at it and say, do you know, there's one group of users who aren't on the map and they also have needs as well. And those users were prisoners. so it was quite an illuminating exercise once we put those on there and started looking at their needs as well and the things that can easily be overlooked.
Yes, agreed. Right, so gas, milk. Right, we'll get rid of that.
And my apologies, I do actually, unfortunately, I have another meeting I have to go to in approximately 7 minutes' time. So I just want to say thank you very much. This was great fun. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully, I didn't. Terribly sorry if it created you pressure. You were doing very well.
No, it's fine. Thank you, Simon. It's a pleasure. Honestly, it's an honour having you with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
And please join for the other one, Simon. So I put the schedule there. We're still going to add a couple more, but I put the schedule. I don't know if you see. I think I also put on the tweet, but on the map camp.
I will absolutely join for the others, and then of course I'm speaking on Monday, isn't it? Monday. Yes, it's in my calendar. Anyway, so I better go because I've got another meeting, client work I've got to jump onto. So have fun and thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Cheers.
Hey, Goher, it's Paul.
Yes.
A quick question. I'm just trying to build the Wardley map, and I don't seem to be able to get the component linking to work for some reason.
So the components that you link, so if you can see my screen, they have to reflect. So you've got milk to whatever it is. So I've got milk to glass. So as long as they reflect the components at the top, then it should link automatically.
Yeah.
Once you've got that, then you can kind of move that to wherever you want to.
Yeah, I've checked and rechecked it, but it doesn't seem to build the links into the map for me.
Paul, make sure that you're not using multiple anchors. I don't think you can link an anchor to an anchor.
No, I'm not. I've only got one anchor.
Is it to components?
Yeah.
Um,
I'm just trying to check I haven't made typos or anything else, but it looks okay to me.
yeah, I think what happens is, and this is annoying with this thing, you don't get an error, is that if you have multiple errors somewhere along the line, right, then after that, the next crowd doesn't work. So it's almost good to take one step at a time, and then see if you're having problems with it. But yeah, sometimes you do get that. I'm actually having that problem right now too. So it's not just theory. Although, do you want to share your screen and then we can take a look?
For me?
No, Paul.
Yeah, can do.
Go for it.
Oh, it says I can't share my screen while somebody else is sharing theirs.
I'll stop sharing mine. There you go.
Okay. Where is it?
All right, we've done 10 minutes. I'll give you another 5, and then we'll get back together and see if anyone has managed to achieve anything. If we haven't, we can work on an almost complete one together.
Well, the first one is that I think is capital sensitive. So you got strawberries with a lowercase s on the left.
Yeah, but on the.
Yeah, but the first one, yeah, you're right. The first one.
So the components shouldn't make any difference. It's only in these relationships, right? So
yeah.
the me and the strawberry milkshake should match me there and strawberry milkshake there.
It should. I think the problem is that component blender. The problem is it's not rendering. See?
Because it's got no location, that's why.
Yeah. So the best way to add new locations is to literally just copy and paste it and then move it on the thing.
Yeah. All right, that's probably the problem. Yeah.
Try that. If you try to delete that guy, what happens?
What's the format for a location?
If you just delete the blender.
So I did something a little bit different, and it's just really rough. But as an idea, I was putting the things that, like, if I were to do an investigation looking for a specific missing person, say, and this is a little bit off from what you guys have normally been doing with it. It looks like, but
actually, Goher, can you, or maybe
So,
yeah, the link is there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Back to you, Goher. I figured out what my issue is. So.
Cool. All right. Let's share screen. I'll put that on there. Share. Cool. Right. I want to have grab something that I can pull together. It's just getting these dependencies.
Remember, you got the link. Can you share his link? It's on the chat. If you go to the chat,
Cool.
can you see Wallaby one?
Let's have a look.
He was just describing it.
Yep. So we've got Wallaby. Let's have a look at that one.
So I literally built it off of the tea shop one, but as you look at it, if you notice, like this is set up for like an investigation, you know, for example, the things that they use more, that they use more frequently would go up in the commodity, and the things that are more visible to the public would go up, you know, in the value chain. So just looking at the amount of information and the way that information is visible on an investigation, it looks like it could actually be really useful. And then just adjusting it based on what I see, you know, the different points of information that I have on them, the different areas that can, you know, I can gather information from. And each of those things would go further, like Twitter, you know, each of the people that they interact with, each of the accounts that they interact with, and who they interact with, you know, more like, you know, in more points, like whether they interact with them on Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook or whatever, you know, each of the points that they're interacting with them, just kind of use the commodity and the value chain to kind of bring about intel from those types of things. It looks like it would be something that could be flushed out more and much more useful. That's just a rough little idea.
I can kind of see you going where you're going with that. You've got the dependency of Instagram and Snapchat into Twitter. I'm just, or the link.
That's as far as like where the dependencies would be more where we found the links to the accounts. So for instance, if you want to keep track of how you got their Instagram account, well, you got that because of this, or, you know, whatever. Obviously the important thing really is the more grounded thing. Email is oftentimes more grounded. They're going to use that for their Facebook, for their Instagram, for their Twitter. And that's going to be less visible than the other things. But at the same time, you have to have some way of denoting which thing showed you which. The Twitter, for instance, has a reference to their Instagram. Hey, you know, follow me at whatever, you know.
Cool. No.
Oh, yeah, so I think in this case, probably what you want to do is see, instead of public, you say the security researcher, right? Or the investigator, correct?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if it's Twitter, you could have Googled that. You could have Googled their name. It shows up, you know, that's their Twitter shows up. You followed that to their Instagram. You followed that to their Facebook and found their email address, you know, through one of the.
I think what the point what Dennis is making is that the anchor, because public and Googled are the anchors. So what it would be the investigator who is the anchor, and he doesn't launch out. So the anchor becomes the investigator, the person, as opposed the public may be a component, but the anchor is the investigator because that's the context. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Because what you're saying is that you start, which is cool, right? All right. T-shop has their own cow.
This is awesome. I love this. Look at this. So you got a field, you got a cow.
Oh, wow.
I mean, this is. So who did this one?
Sebastian.
That's really good. So what barn? I love it. Fantastic. I love it. But this is great, right? This is exactly gives you a real good context of where things are. So if we look at the context of this, actually, Sebastian, do you want to talk us through this?
Yeah, can do.
If you want to analyze it.
So yeah, I took the template from the tea shop, as you can probably tell. I figured for my strawberry milkshake, if I was to make it, it'd probably just be strawberry ice cream, some fresh strawberries maybe, and some milk.
Yep.
But I figured to make it more interesting for my shop, I'd own my own cow. So you can't really custom build a cow, so I put it in the genesis stage. And obviously that cow needs to be looked after, so it's got a field that I own myself, a barn that I built, and some cow food that I get from a local farmer's market.
Fantastic.
That barn needs power, and so does the blender to make the milkshake.
Yeah, that's great. No, I like it. I love it. You've got the components, you put them in the right place, and from a strategic standpoint, you'd look at this, right? And so you've done this as a humor, but if this was reality, you look at this and say, this is the area we should be focusing on, because why do we have milk? Why are we getting milk from a cow in a field to make milkshake? You'd probably want to buy milk from off the shelf, or you'd want to maybe not have the field, but you might have milk from another source. So it's really interesting, but it's really well illustrated, and I think you put it together really well.
But also, like, what's interesting about this, right? And this is where again, when Simon says that you've validated the assumptions. When I read this map, you're basically telling that your cow is making custom milk. So actually, so this is a good example of, are you sure? I think your cow probably is making, it could be, right? Let's say that your cow was super special and it's created a complete unique blend of milk, and that's what individuals want, right? Because what where you could say, is the milk that the cow is creating, just like another milk, is just, it's basically, it's produced locally. So because the difference is, the milk is still a product. The difference is it comes from that genesis, because your cow, and this also will say that the cow is, like you said, is actually almost living as a pet, right? Versus being a product, right? So if you had a massive farm that has literally the cows was already productized, then that would be more to the right. But remember that this might make business sense, because if you're selling organic ice cream, right, made with cows that are completely organic and they live in special barns and you only have a small amount, then there's a premium, that free range, correct? There's premium that people pay.
Yeah, no, brilliant.
Yeah. It could be specialist breeds, or they could be unpasteurized milk that you use.
They could have no, hormones or anything like that added.
Yeah, and you can drill down into each one of these components, right? You can, if we drill down into Blender, you could use that as the anchor, and then you can start looking at the brand. You can start looking at the blender, how big the blender is, the types of blades on the blender, the speed it runs at, and you can start breaking it down and mapping that out in that same way.
Yeah. And what you want to see, right? You want to see what is the business. In a way, one of the doctrines, right? And one of the things that we look at is always understand your customer. So if the customer is buying organic, for example, milk, right? Actually, what you want to invest is probably on a blender, because the customer doesn't care, right? So instead of having a custom blender that maybe you created, because the customer doesn't care about it, if you move that to the right, your cost of your blenders goes very high. Well, so it goes much lower, right? And you can see in this case, you're buying a cow food from organic, so not organic, you're buying just off the shelf, but you have your organic cows, which is really cool, right? So this is allows you to have a strategy for where you're moving next, which is kind of what those lines are. So the lines there, the evolution, it's almost your strategy, right? Like, what am I going to do? So in this case, you're saying that your strategy is to get better power, and because that's what you're moving from one to the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. That's great.
Right.
That's a really good example. I like that.
Next one.
So we've got another milkshake. So this is someone who's definitely buying off the shelf. Who created this one, if they're willing to share?
That's me. I can talk you through very quick.
Yeah.
So the idea was we're selling milkshakes, which you need a blender, a big glass, and ingredients. The blender is off the shelf. so is the glass and obviously the power, the milk, water, ice. Please forgive me that there's no ice cream in my ingredients, but that's okay. And then the flavor is the one thing that we make inside the shop, right? So that's custom built by us, be it the vanilla or the chocolate or the strawberry or whatever the ingredients are for that flavor. But what's standing out for me now is looking at this, I can see either as a business, we want to evolve our flavor so that it becomes a commodity and other shops start buying that flavor from us, or rather than making a custom build flavor, do I go into the market and buy an off-the-shelf flavor? So I can see that as two different directions, right? Either I can save on costs by going and getting a custom a commodity flavor, or I can evolve mine and then opens up new markets to start selling my own flavor to other things.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
But that's what stood out to me there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point. So here, you've probably got everything probably where you want it to be. You might want to create your own glass, like a special, Luke's, milkshake shop glass. And then that all of a sudden it goes here, right? Because then you're creating your own.
Yeah.
So, but it helps you understand that. That's great. And then last but not least, we've got another one. This is, who created this one?
It's me, but I realised I've got the fridge and the freezer and the blender in the wrong place. I was thinking of them as a product that I bought, not a product that I'm selling or that I'm making.
No, but that's fine. So the fridge and the freezer, if you're using your own, like an off-the-shelf fridge or a freezer, then that can stay there. And then you've got the blender and the strawberries. So you're buying the strawberries, but you've got your glass, you've got your milk and ice cream. But again, what's really interesting is there's different approaches, there's different visualizations. They all can be correct based on the anchor and the context of the business. So it's really good. Really, really good. Thanks, everyone. That was really good exercise. I like that.
Well, I got one for you. Just give me a second.
The biggest lesson learned for me there, Goher, was that once you've mapped the components and the linking, you can drag and drop the dots, so you don't have to manually edit the coordinates.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's a huge timer. That's what I spent half my time doing, was editing the coordinates rather than dragging and dropping them.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. All right, cool. So I got one for you. It's not completed, but actually it should tell the story.
Popping into the link.
Yeah, I'll put the link now here. Give me a second. And cool. And so this has a bit of an interesting twist to it. I don't need the power. And okay, I haven't added everything, but you guys get to see the picture, right? Okay, where is it? Save. Cool. Chat. Everyone, there you go. All right, so you want to open up?
Yep, got it. Coming up.
So what this shows you the kind of the different, like, remember what Simon was saying, the different stakeholders. So what you have is you have a dad, right, who wants a piece, right? and which is a very custom build, right? It's a very precious actually asset, right? And then you have a daughter who wants a strawberry milkshake, right? And actually what I was going to play with is I was going to move that creating. Actually, can you do it? Can you move the creating to the right, to the left, sorry, to the left. So you can see here that you can leave it there. You can see here the problem at the moment, right? Or even maybe Genesis, right? So you can move all the way to the left. Yeah, so you can see here the problem is that, I need to create a milkshake, but actually the process of creating is very manual, right? And I still have to go and buy the strawberry. So you can also, the strawberry is a product, the milk is a product, the cup is a product, the blender. In fact, some of them could be moved a bit more to the right? Like the cup, especially the strawberry. And it is interesting that you can think of, right? Although it's sometimes on this, you could say, like, can I get it directly from the shops, right? Or actually, where do I get? So maybe the strawberries, like if you move the strawberries actually to the left, what you can then say is that actually the strawberries are harder to get, right? Maybe, in this situation, the strawberries are harder to get. And if I want to improve this, what I need to do is I'm going to move that creating to the right, right? And there's an argument to be said that I can there's an alternative to this. I can just buy it, the strawberry milkshake from the shop, right? So then you can ask the question, how much does the daughter cares, right? because if the daughter cares that it's a organic strawberry, with organic milk, then in a specific blender on a specific cup, right? Which actually means that the cup maybe should go to the left, then it becomes much harder than if everything, so if this was correct, then what you want to do is you want to convince the daughter to take normal strawberries, right? Or any kind of strawberry. So once you can move the strawberries to the right, then I can replace all of this with off-the-shelf strawberry milkshake.
Yeah.
How can a strawberry be custom built?
Well,
it can be grown in your own garden.
Yeah, so actually you're right. So if the strawberry comes from my own garden, it will be either, and this already implies that I have a really good production line, right, on my garden. If it's literally the ones that you plant normally, it would be completely Genesis, or at least custom built to the left.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember that also the position where it is, it also implies how fast or how close you are to make the jump into a proper product, right?
Absolutely.
So could it be that if strawberries are delivered to your shop, they're a commodity, but if you're going to the farmer's market to pick them up, they might be a product or custom built because it's harder to access. It's more expensive to get, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you could be buying them in frozen, ready to go in a packet from Tesco, which could bring it to a commodity, right?
Yeah.
So great, fantastic. That was really good. Really enjoyed that. Thank you for everyone's input. That's awesome. And I'm mindful that we're all here in a security meeting. This is security focused, and we're talking about building milkshakes and doing that. But I think it was a really good exercise, and hopefully everyone found that useful. By way of a thumbs up, was that useful for everyone?
How do you do thumbs up? I don't know how to do that.
Okay, I'll assume it's a thumbs up. Okay, getting thumbs up round, so that's good.
But then I still don't know how to do it.
No, that's fine. And look, this is an intro, but for sure, I mean, this is something that takes time.
Go to reactions on Zoom, where it says participant chat and reactions. You can click on it. There you go.
Perfect. Awesome. Excellent. Okay, so this is the stuff that Dennis was asking about earlier, and I'm just going to talk about some examples I've kind of used to try and help me understand using Wardley Maps. Now, this isn't fundamental exact science Wardley Maps that's kind of done, but this is definitely where I found it useful, and it's really helped me. So I'll talk through them, and it hopefully gives some understanding. So for us, it was this one was created for incident management. So we wanted to get a better understanding of what our incident management looked like. So worked with the team and said, right, okay, normally you have an incident that's reported, the ticket's logged, there's an initial assessment, get more information, you verify the data, assess the impact, follow escalation channel, contain the incident, remediation actions, and the lessons learned. That's the general flow and process. This can vary and change, but this was what we discussed in the team. So this is just a straightforward value chain. When I mapped it out, this is kind of what it looked like based on the maturity of that, of each of those components. So when the incident was reported, it was reported into a system that we use. So that was not too bad. The ticket was logged into a system that was visible to everyone. So that was good. And you noticed I'm using weak, good, advanced, and expert. So for me, that's just an easier term for me to get my head around. And when I'm talking with the team around the definitions, rather than the sort of genesis all the way through to commodity, just to give some context. The initial assessment was visible, everyone was involved, it was all in a tool. Getting more information was a bit weak because we were using old logging tools and we couldn't get to all the logs. Verifying the data, we had a team to look at that, so that was fairly good. We assessed the impact. Again, the assessment of the impact was so-so, and the information captures were so-so because it was one person doing that. So it helped, so for each of these, you'd be able to dive in and say, right, how are we doing that? But it helped map out the process based on the maturity we have and how good or not good we were. Then we contained the incident, so that was good. We had 3 people working on that to get that resolved. It was contained using Jira, and and some good tools to contain it, and we had some automation which we could do that. The remediation actions were weak because it was being dealt by one person to remediate them. Also, it was very bespoke. It was just, there was no playbook to follow. It was just, we'll do this action, we'll do that action. And then the lessons learned were captured well because they were captured in Jira, which gave us good context. So there, you can add extra dependencies. So we added extra dependencies. So the log files wasn't good. So getting more information was harder. The risk assessment wasn't good or as mature as we'd like it to be. That's why it impacted the risk assessment. The tickets logged and the information captured relied on Jira, which was a good repository. So Jira sits here because it helps me understand that Jira is actually a good tool that everyone's got visibility on that's built, but actually the way it was captured and the information wasn't so good, and it gives that context. And then verifying the data, we had the IT teams, which we had a pretty advanced, in this context, IT team to deal with that, but it wasn't the systems. So it helps build a context, and this is how I mapped this out to help give context on what we need to improve. So without going into too much of the details on what, on what does each specific thing means, what it does help me understand is that this area here, so let me get the pointer, this area here is something that we need to be better at. So we need to be better at assessing the impact, we need to be better at information capture, and we need to be better at remediation. And then what that means is, from a strategic standpoint and a direction and a map, it tells me these are where we can focus less on, and this is where we should be focusing our efforts on, based on the context of what we're looking at. Does that make some sense? Because we've gone from quite simple things to something this is a little bit more involved, a little bit more complicated. But does that make sense to everyone? So this is where we can then apply that principle, that methodology to security. It becomes more useful, more powerful, because all of a sudden we're looking at something, we're all visual creatures. Rob mentioned it earlier, but actually we like to see things visually. So actually when you see things visually, it's easier to then pick it apart and really understand it. And that's why mapping becomes super powerful. Whereas in the previous one, if we're looking at it like that, we can have that linear, or we can have it in a sort of graph format, but it doesn't really tell me too much. It just tells me that's the process. Cool. Right, this is one that Dennis hasn't seen, so I'll be interested to get Dennis's take on it. But what I did was I took our roadmap and I used that roadmap, and I use it. I'll put it onto a Wardley Map because I thought it'd be useful for me to have understanding and for me to explain as well to the key stakeholders in the business. So we looked at 5 key areas in cybersecurity, which was pulled apart. And this isn't the model we use, but this was something just to give an understanding. So I plotted, so there were 6 areas under cybersecurity governance. One was InfoSec awareness, governance and leadership, risk management, policy, supply management, and DevSec awareness. Now I plotted these out based on what my understanding was. So with DevSec awareness, there wasn't any training that was done for DevSec. There was no kind of real understanding, knowledge share, documentation. So that's why that's in that corner. InfoSec awareness, there's a an e-learn platform that everyone can see, but it wasn't very good. It was the content was out of date, etc. And this is where I applied this kind of mapping. I mapped it out. So there's not so many dependencies. If you go into it, there'll be more dependencies. If you was going to governance and leadership, it then starts having more dependencies, but it was good to map that out. What then happened was I said, right, the target is we should be moving in those directions. And I put the arrows to give the direction of travel, which was, this is where we'd like to be when we reach that target. So this is quite out of date now, but it's good for the context of where we are and to explain what it is. And what was useful was the direction of travel would be dictated by these key programs and projects within those areas. So the idea was to do that in a way where you say, right, these things will help, would affect that direction of travel from left to right. So that was planned. So that helped that planning on what we should do based on those areas. And then what was quite useful in visual, so this isn't less Wardley Map, but this is more strategic. Each of those programs and projects were graded in red, amber, green, red being blocked, amber being in progress, green being completed. And based off of that, we can then map where we are. And all of a sudden you have this kind of, so you've got your kind of where the starting point, you've got the target, and then you've got your kind of where the actuality is for each of those. And we did something similar with cybersecurity defense as well. And again, it just helps paint a picture, the direction of travel and understanding, because we want to focus more effort on these ones down here. Actually, all of this was pretty weak. We wanted to get it in that direction, in an upward trajectory. Any thoughts, comments, feedback?
I had an interesting idea about like using headers as far as sections, being able to zoom into different headers that represent, like, if security incident response was a header, right?
Yeah.
You could zoom in and see what's under that header, you know, as a kind of like a, you think XML, you know, or like
Correct.
that kind of navigation. That'd be pretty sweet to be able to implement.
Absolutely. So what you're talking about, Wallaby, is if I was to click onto that, it's security incident response, it will take me to the other slide with the security incident management, almost. The one
Yeah,
that,
but without slides, like if it zoomed in to it,
correct.
like if you created some sort of a, yeah,
like, absolutely.
Like a link to it, yeah.
Absolutely. And that's where it becomes dynamic and 3D, because it is 3D. It's not just that kind of linear, what we're looking at now. It's dynamic in many ways. So,
no, this is brilliant. In fact, you know, what I like about this, right, is that we should actually try to almost create a kind of a standard, right, or at least a set of questions, right, that we should get every company or every team to map out, right? Because this is you understand, right, you know, where we are in terms of the maturity, right, you know, of these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is also a good example of a map that doesn't particularly have the chain of needs. But I actually quite like these kind of maps too, because, you know, it shows you the evolution and where you are, right, in terms of the things to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just it's that visual understanding, it's that strategy, it's that direction. This is where we should be going. This is where we need to go. How do we get there? And I think what was really interesting on the journey of the map was, what are we missing? What do I need to see that will help me or whoever's looking at it see? Because when I was working at Photobox with Dennis, the conversation was, how do we get this in front of exec or whoever it is in the organization? And they look at it and they understand what that means straight away. And if you've got a map that someone looks at, so you pick up a Google map or a atlas or something, literally you look at it, you know what it means. It doesn't, you might have to understand how to read the context, for example, the scale, but if you look at it, you know what it is, you know, it's a location, etc.
So this is a form of Wardley Map, though. I mean, this is obviously quite useful. I mean, nice to see target and actual, etc. But this isn't, is this actually a Wardley Map as such?
It's a variation of a Wardley Map.
It's a variation, yeah. Okay.
It's not a true Wardley Map, but I think it's really to give some context around how it can be used. So it's very, you know, you can use it for what you need it for based on the principles that are set.
So, so Simon's pioneered this, and you're sort of settling it now, are you? Or was that?
I wouldn't say so much that. I think it's you know, for me, that's what made sense to me, and I think that's really important. Because, you know, we have to make sense of what we're using. We can't just take something out of the box and just use it, because it doesn't always work, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
important sometimes not to get too religious about this. I actually went once to there was an event that someone organized, and there was this massive debate over lunch of what is a Wardley map and what is not, right? I think that the key point should be if it's a map, right? And I think if it's a map, we're good. The only little thing I was just thinking about it is that if you don't have the value of change or the sequence of needs, then the vertical, almost you need to define what the vertical is. And in this case, it's almost the vertical is a bit redundant, right? Because if you look at it, you have a line moving up. So you're almost implying that higher is better than lower, but you already got that on the x-axis. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but we did the invisible was based on the awareness and understanding across the organization. So, you know, if you look at the context of the business, if something is no one knows about it and it doesn't happen, it sits in the bottom left. Whereas if people are aware of it but it doesn't happen, then it goes up the chain. And that was that was the context behind the y-axis.
Yeah, I guess what's interesting there would be, because then you want to put an anchor at the top, which is the actual consumer. But you're right. I think in that case, then you probably don't need it, because if that's the logic of the assumption, right? That's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. I thought it'd just be.
No, cool.
And then this is the PCI audit. So this was while me and Dennis were collaborating back in the day. And this is something, again, from a kind of a GRC standpoint. So we've looked at the technical hands-on example. This is more of a mapping out the process. So we looked at the process and mapped it out and then said, how do we make improvements? And we did that. So there's a lot going on with this, so you'll have to forgive me. So this is basically the whole PCI audit mapped out. And you've noticed I've used directions of where things have gone. So in a nutshell, the auditor came in, they spoke to the group security team. The group security team would reach out to all the different teams, and then the policy owners, and then the policy owners would look at the policies, which were captured on our drive, and they were then reported into Excel, and Excel was then reported. Then the group security team would get that from Excel and then give it into the audit storage, and the auditor would get it back. And then we've got evidence review, policy storage. So this was kind of, in a nutshell, all the components that we did for that were needed to carry out a PCI audit. The frustration was there was some really good, so Jira worked really well, so we're still using Jira, but actually it's not efficient. So I've put a legend in just to help make sense of this and how that works.
Just one second. Can you guys see how one of the powers of the map is that we can use all sorts of color coding and shapes and almost metadata, visual metadata, to make this easy to read. So this is a good example of a map that if the colors were not there, it would be really hard for your brain to process. But because of the way it's color coded, it gets very efficient. But also there's other maps that, for example, the size of the actual circle could mean other things. So you can have this really cool, very informative map because you show multiple dimensions. And then when you look at the strategy, that allows you to understand what is actually going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did, we used this. So this was the audit before. So that's what the process looked like. What we did was we said, right, okay, as part of the maturity, we want to remove Excel. So we've got Excel, sorry, the colors have gone a bit weird, but that was a weak point. We wanted to get rid of Excel because it wasn't helpful. And we also wanted a central storage because it was, you've got storage here, you've got storage here. We wanted somewhere where it was central, easy to get to, that everyone had access to. So what we did, we basically moved through having that central storage. We moved evidence storage, evidence review, evidence policy storage, the policies all into one location, which was easy to get to. What that meant was that actually all of a sudden the whole flow changed. So we went to that, but everything was then reported into Jira. And then we had all the storage was in one location. So all of a sudden we were using a location that wasn't an Excel spreadsheet in someone's personal drive or in some remote location somewhere. It was all in one storage location, which was then linking into Jira. And then Jira was the source of truth, which then we could then give back to the audit storage. So it became a much easier exercise. What actually I've missed in here, I've just realized, is that the auditor could actually go directly to Jira if we gave them access, and they could just pull all their reports themselves if they wanted to. And that was where it became powerful. So again, it's just a really good example of, or it's just an example of how you can use it to your advantage to help you understand. But also, if we go through from the beginning, we can say this is where we were in terms of our mapping and our maturity and our efficiency to where we are now. Does anyone have any questions or comments around this? Because I appreciate we've got 10 minutes, so I want to leave that open for questions, discussion, feedback, anything that anyone wants to talk about, even problem solving. If someone has a challenge, we can do it community, do it together.
So Goher, this is Paul. I mean, one of the things in using Wardley Maps, every time I look at them, is people find new and interesting ways to represent what's going on in their business process or whatever they're trying to represent in there.
Yeah.
Are there any good sources from your experience for interesting and creative ways to use the Wardley Map tool to represent things?
So I didn't use the online tool. I basically created this in PowerPoint because for me, and I'll demonstrate this if I escape out of the presentation, is I built this because I found it easier to visualize and you can be more graphical with it. So
yeah,
I created those links there because it was helpful to me. And I think if you use the principles and the foundations of what Simon Wardley's pulled together, then it's down to you to make sense of that and something that makes it easy. And I think it goes back to the conversation that, you know, what Dennis was saying is, and what I was saying earlier is that it's all about, can someone pick it up and read it and understand what it means? That's the trick. If you can get it in that format, then you've got something, a Wardley map that is usable. And that's where we want to get to. And that was always the focus for when I was creating these. And now they're not perfect. They still need evolution. They still need work. But the idea is that someone can try and read that and make sense. Now, the next iteration would be cleaner, better, more efficient. Maybe the legend changes. Maybe we use different colors. Maybe we change the size of the nodes. Not sure, but it has to make sense. Does that kind of answer?
Yeah, kind of. I was just curious if there was a good example set of creative ways people have used maps to try and represent things like different points in timeline of evolution or intent of migration of certain technologies like you're showing here for central storage.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think there's a really good, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, Creative Commons sources out there for Wardley Maps, and it's a very open community. So I'm sure there's examples if you look. I haven't looked for it intentionally, but I have come across some interesting stuff. Like Mario does some great stuff on it as well. He uses it very creatively. But yeah, I can't fully answer that question because I don't fully know, to be honest.
Okay, thanks.
Is there any good offline version of like the mapping site that we might be able to use, like something that we could
Yeah, oh look, I can share the template. I can share the PowerPoint template if that helps. This will be made available as well. So you know, please feel free to use it as you need to.
Hi, it's Nadesh here.
Hi.
I obviously I didn't know about these Wardley maps before. Know about mind maps and use them a little bit. Surely something like this, for example, can be put on a mind map, on a different mind map, for example. What unique benefits do you think this provides?
So I think going back to the original point, I think it was basically it gives you a direction. So mind map will branch out and give you loads of components. But if I looked at a mind map, would it tell me what's good and what's not good? What do I need to pay attention to and what do I need to not worry about? That's where a Wardley map, if it's done well, is really useful, because it helps you focus on certain areas, because it's visual, it's a direction of travel. Whereas a mind map can be really useful. If you was to combine a mind map and put it over this Wardley mapping, and then move the different bubbles around based on your mind map, that would be powerful. So similar to the example earlier, which was the diagram. So if I put that diagram on top of this, I should then be able to move these around to the right areas to give me an understanding. So if we're printing off of printers we've made ourselves, that will come here and that will tell me, well, do we need to invest in better printers? But if it's just a print and then we've got branches off of that, it's not as useful. But that's from a strategic direction and context standpoint. So it gives you more context, it gives you better understanding and meaning to what you're looking at, rather than it just being branches off of one node.
So Nadesh, one of the things that would be really useful for you to do, so Nadesh leads our QA team, right? One of the things that would be very useful is to map all the things you need to do when you're doing, for example, a testing of an application. And then
the idea behind the use of mind map was for software testing, and by using, I'm not sure how we would use Wardley maps. Go on, Dennis.
The same way that you map your dependencies and the actions you do, what you can capture from, even if you look at weak, good, advanced, and experts, or again the genesis in commoditized works very well in that case, is you can map where are the maturity steps. So for example, like if you have when you use something like BDD or Cucumber or some of those techniques, that's a very expert or advanced technique, right? But then if you have to manually do tests, then that's on the Genesis weak level. So when you look at, for example, all the tests that you have to do to ship a product, in one extreme is that everything is kind of automated and you're just writing automated tests or variations of the tests. But you have a huge amount of scalability because everything is kind of advanced or at least productized. But if you have manual things, then they Genesis and custom build. So then we realize that if you want to improve the QA, if you want to improve the workflow, and we need to focus on those areas that at the moment you're quite weak, because that's the areas that we need to improve. And it might be not obviously you, but say the function. So it might be that the development team is not giving you guys good APIs. It might be that you don't have good ways to automate some of the process. Maybe you don't have good test accounts, or you don't have good systems to test because it takes a long time to spin up a new version of what you have to test. Or maybe the test files are not as available as you could. So it's like the PCI is a great example, because if you look at the PCI, Goher, can you go to the beginning of the PCI one, right? It's a perfect example of that reality where you start to see, look, where are we do you keep, for example, do you keep your test cases in Excel? Do you use any kind of manual steps? So if you can kind of map the ecosystem of tools and processes that you use, right, when you do the release process, for example, of a product, then you start to see the gaps that exist and where to spend time and where to put effort.
Yeah, that's really useful. Thanks, Dennis.
Well, one of the things that we didn't cover a lot today, but it's very important, is actually the attrition element, right? And I think the attrition is super important, because what actually happens, right, is that if you look at a lot of times, although things can move from left to right, sometimes they don't, because there's a lot of forces, and sometimes even success causes that, right? There's a lot of forces that prevent that. So actually,
is it the inertia?
Yeah, the inertia. Can you open this? Can you just, because I think maybe it's worthwhile, because this is one of the best cases that I've heard. And can you open that? And can you go to minute, it's only 2 minutes.
Yeah, fine. I'll
1.2. 1.125.
What's happening here? Sorry, one minute. Hold up. I don't know what's going on.
All right, so one of the things I'll talk about at the very beginning is the whole strategy cycle. So you start off with a game, whatever you're doing, you have to understand the landscape in order to learn climatic patterns, which you need for.
Right. There you go. There it is. I have to stop and start to share the sound. Excuse me, 1 second. Share computer sound.
What this is, and I think it's a brilliant little nugget of explanation that we got Simon in one of the pre-summit sessions, and just got to 1.2 minutes, Goher, and what it is Simon explaining what happens to physical events and virtual events, and it's a great example of sometimes, you know, the attrition and the willingness to go back to how you work or not being able to innovate causes industries to collapse, right? And we've seen that with Blockbuster, we've seen that with all sorts of things happening now. We're seeing that, you know, so you talk about the isolation economy. We're not seeing your screen.
Let me just share my screen again. Sorry, I thought I did. There you go, share sound. There you go.
Cool.
You got it?
Yeah, just go for 1 minute 20 and then you're good. Yeah, about that.
Okay, what I'd like to do is go through an example, and I'll use events. So I just, because you mentioned it, I just quickly. I just took the slide. So I'll go from the point of view of the user wants to go to an event and has a physical space. We know we've been able to virtualize, events for ages. But we haven't done so because of the whole social aspect, because you go to a virtual event, you don't get to meet people. So we've had inertia to change and our attitude of not wanting to change. But we know at the same time that as things virtualize, new emerging practices will appear and new ways of doing things will appear. So it's all positive, but nonetheless, like any other industry, we've had that inertia. And we know if we make the jump, then capital will flow into these new areas. That's the whole creative destruction. And what's driving the change right now is this new need for an isolation economy in terms of physical isolation. It's not that, the technology wasn't there. It's not that we couldn't do this. It's just that we're resisting. There'll be piano playing in the background. My son is learning to play. And of course, if you're a business who sells physical space and events, well, you've got all the inertia to change. Well, that's point G, which is normal, okay? So what we have is a whole bunch of businesses with pre-existing businesses, and what they believe, and this is the bit that we need to talk about, is that at the end of the pandemic, we're just going to go back to how it was. Then we just have to survive, and then we'll go back. We'll go back to physical events. We'll go back to our pre-existing business model, and all the rest of it. Won't it be great? And the answer is that's probably never going to happen. What's going to happen is we're more likely because of creating online events, they're likely to stick around. We've got the experience to do this. We've just had inertia. We'll be overcoming that. And at the same time, we're going to get this entire new world of new practices, new things we haven't thought about because we've industrialized the underlying space. So that's the exciting stuff. So that's the sort of stuff I'd want to talk about on the second day. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Cool.
Right.
What I didn't want to do is I didn't want to chuck that in because of the 2 hour slot, and it was an introduction, but it's a absolutely really important point, and I'm sure a lot of the people hopefully it's given them a good taster of what Wardley Maps is and how it can be useful. And obviously I think that starts going into intermediate and advanced, and I didn't want to blow people's minds because that's the bit that started blowing my mind when I first looked at it.
Yeah, it was great.
Okay, cool. Any other questions from anyone?
I did just want to clarify. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just want to clarify. So, pretty much just the use of the PDF is the way to be able to do it offline. There's not really like a something more automated where you know, like it's already set up with mind map type stuff or anything like that?
Only what you saw earlier is, I think that's available online free of charge, so you can use that. I bespoke my one to PowerPoint because I found it easier, because I could do that. But I mean, as I said, I can share that. There may be something out there, Dennis. I don't know. Do you know if there's anything else?
Yeah, actually, there's that one, that version, and if you want to play with, there's actually a version that we created for the last summit, actually, that uses I did this implementation where I actually used Jira to capture the state. So you can actually create a Wardley maps in Jira, and then we actually use Jupyter notebooks and actually a serverless function to actually render the map in itself. And that worked quite well. It's something that I think we need to evolve a little bit, but it was a pretty cool concept. So basically it was a serverless function that will go to Jira, get the data, which basically is just a ticket for each of the nodes that will then contain the status. And you can actually use the Kanban board to move it around. So that was quite cool. And then I would create a picture, and then I would send it back to Slack. So that it was kind of quite. So I can expand on that if you're interested.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's worth dropping into the chat and maybe sharing post this. That'd be useful.
I should do a session on that. But I think it's definitely an area that, if you look at the Wardley maps, the map creation, ironically, it's still on custom build, I would say, at the moment.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed. Brilliant. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Where I know we're running over, and I know people need to probably run along.
Yeah. I think one thing that kind of comes to the front of my mind from today is not talk about, you know, you're doing well if you push everything to the right on the Wardley map, but it doesn't always appear to be the case to me that is the right thing in any context, and people ought not to forget that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's context, and it is down to the anchor, and obviously the context of what you're mapping. So, you know, absolutely.
Well, remember, Paul, that, for example, like you can think strategically, right? So you can basically, for example, think, well, I know that, you know, for example, I'm not going to benefit from the move to the right. So I can actually actively in the market behave in ways that make that harder. For example, like if you lobby for certain regulations, you might resist, you might put attrition into that move to the right. The problem is that if that's your strategy, sometimes you are basically depending on your competitor not to find a way to commoditize that.
But that depends on if who your anchor consumer is, right? And whether they value the same thing everybody else is getting, only cheaper, or whether they value a unique experience in some way.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure the Blockbuster consumer, at the top, they didn't want the video stream to be successful, right? From their point of view, things were fine when I have to go to the video store and get my latest video, right?
Yeah, but that's just that evolution of consumers, right? When you look at this, that consumer anchor is constantly moving, and what they want is constantly changing, and people ought not to forget that.
And that's why when you look at the doctrine and the climatic patterns, which is the next evolution of the early maps, so there's a bunch of patterns that Simon has mapped from pay attention to the customer, etc. But one of them is the co-evolution that will happen, right? So the things will evolve, and that's a pattern that will happen. Now, whether you can slow it down or you can not encourage it to evolve, the bottom line is that within time, things that became a genesis will become a custom build, will become product, will become a commodity.
Yeah.
It's interesting to look at market cycles in that as well. When you look at things like storage, disk drives have got smaller and smaller and smaller, and that's been very much driven by the customer demand for more portable devices. Mm-hmm. And every time that's essentially pushed storage solutions from being heavily commoditized back to being pioneer space again, of trying to figure out how do they fit the same amount of storage into a tenth of the space.
Yep.
I had one thing, actually, I'm just going to share this. Dennis, you might be interested in this, but I started tinkering with Wardley Maps, and I probably shouldn't, so I don't know if I should share this now, but what I did was I started looking at CMMI and doing a hybrid with Wardley Maps, and I just want to quickly share it and just be interested to get everyone's thoughts on that.
Oh, man, evolve at will. I was trying to create a map the other day that has 2 anchors, one at the top, one at the bottom.
Yeah. So what I started looking at was the y-axis was initial, evolving, capable, and fully implemented. So based on that, and it was just something I was playing around with. I never got anywhere with it, but I just started looking at it.
Really good.
And that could be interesting as something that could be useful. So I'll probably experiment with it, but just going to throw it out there where you could situate this based on kind of maturity.
Hasn't that almost taken the traditional Wardley x-axis and put it on the opposite one?
It is and it isn't. So the fully implemented. So you've got the maturity of the maturity of the product versus is it something that people are not using, or that's not being what's the word? It's not being used, or it's not visible, or
right.
So all of a sudden you get a better, so if it's fully implemented, it's integrated. Whereas, if you've got a product, you could have something that's, really good product, but if it's not implemented or it's not capable of doing something, then it's not as useful. It was just something I was tinkering with ideas and things like that. So I thought it would be useful just to share as we're discussing general kind of usage and things like that.
Yeah. Good. Right. I think we can wrap it up to a close. This was a great session. Brilliant. Thanks for everybody. Alona, I think you can stop the recording and